Welcome to the Filmlinks podcast,
a weekly podcast where we analyze all that goes into effective filmmaking.
I'm Jonathan.
And I'm Alex.
And this is week 15, Cornetto Crash Course.
Oh man, I should have brought some ice cream today.
Yeah, this is a yummy week. We're talking about the Edgar Wright's Three Flavors Cornetto Trilogy.
Right, so named because even though the stories don't run together, each film features a different flavor of cornetto ice cream, and we'll get into the meaning of what cornetto is. It's not super deep, it's just a fun bit of trivia, but we're going to bury the lead on it, so you keep listening.
Yeah, but first of all, let's just talk a little bit about who Edgar Wright is. Edgar Wright is a British filmmaker. All of these films are very London-centric, I guess you could call them. He's about 42 right now, so he's still in the prime of his career, and he's got a new movie coming out, which is kind of the impetus for this episode. He went to college at Bournemouth and Poole College of Art, which I think is called something else right now, but in 1994, he released his first feature-length film, which is called A Fistful of Fingers, which was, as the title might suggest, a parody on Western films, which got him a little bit of attention and eventually got him to direct some episodes of the show Spaced, which was written by Simon Pegg and kind of started their now career-long friendship and work together. And recently he created the Cornetto Trilogy and also Scott Pilgrim versus the World, which is kind of his only kind of mainstream film work. He's done other music videos and stuff like that. And there's also this weird thing where he keeps being slated to work on films and then getting replaced by other directors. For example, Mission Impossible Ghost Protocol, which was eventually directed by Brad Bird, and Ant-Man.
Essentially, it was just reabsorbed by the Marvel Universe. So the film that Edgar Wright was planning, which was planned before Ant-Man was slated to be part of the MCU, kind of fell by the wayside once Marvel woke up to their MCU aspirations.
Yeah, MCU being Marvel's cinematic universe. Okay, so that's a little bit about our director this week. Alex, you want to just kind of give us a brief overview of what the three specific movies that we'll be talking about are?
Yeah, so the Cornetto Trilogy all started back in 2004 when Shaun of the Dead came out. It's a mixture of a British comedy film and kind of a zombie genre horror, as the name implies, and just kind of smushed those two together, and it worked really well. It was super popular, still is, and after that success, Edgar Wright went ahead and started to plan out the rest of this thematic trilogy, where he could do these big productions with him, Simon Pegg, and Nick Frost. Nick Frost and Simon Pegg being the two lead actors in each of the films.
And also each of these films are written by Edgar Wright and Simon Pegg. So after Shaun of the Dead became really popular, Simon Pegg and Edgar Wright decided that they could create a trilogy of films that weren't connected through their story, but rather connected through the themes tackled in the film and the different stylistic elements that were used to present the story. So we'll talk about all that today.
Yeah, that's definitely the meat of this episode, and super interesting, and it plays really well on screen. But coming back around to that bit of trivia I promised, Cornetto was Wright's hangover cure in college, so it just kind of ended up in the film as a joke, and then it became a running gag, and then it became the name of the trilogy after an interview Wright gave.
Yep. So our second film in the, quote, trilogy is Hot Fuzz from 2007. This was a buddy. This is a buddy cop film. It has a little bit of traces of westerns in it and stuff. And another thing that we'll see through all of these is that Edgar Wright knows his movies, and he is not shy about taking those influences and incorporating them into his own work.
Oh, for sure. Mountains upon mountains of references and homages and tricks and tips taken from here and there, put into each of them.
Yeah, so just to kind of, put Edgar Wright's cinematic influences into perspective, a couple of years ago, he had an article online where him and I think a journalist kind of went through, and he made a list of his top 1,000 films. So anyone who has a top 1,000 films out of all the films that they've seen, definitely has a thing for movies, and we can see that in his work.
Yeah, I'm not even sure if I've seen 1,000 movies. That's intense. But moving on.
Yeah, that I can remember anyway.
Yeah. Oh, for sure. No, I definitely don't have 1,000 ranked.
Right.
I don't even think I have 100 ranked. But anyway, moving on. The last one, the last member of the Cornetto Trilogy is, the Three Flavors Cornetto Trilogy is the proper name. Is The World's End from 2013. It's a 6-year gap, but that's because he did Scott Pilgrim in 2010, 2011. So he took time off to do a North American film, and then came back to England to do another British film. And it's a genre sci-fi movie. It's all about aliens. But again, it tackles the same themes as the other two movies does, and it has the same brand of humor built into it.
Absolutely. So we're going to dig into each of these films now, but I think probably the meat of this episode will be in the overall notes. First of all, because Hot Fuzz and The World's End have some big spoilers that take up most of the film.
Yeah.
And also because most of the stuff that we want to talk about are things that run through all of the films and are just kind of, have specific instances that happen in each film rather than individual points for each movie.
And that's how it was designed. Like you mentioned earlier, each of the 3 films is designed to be part of a trilogy in that they tackle the same themes and feature the same actors and carry the same sense of visual comedy and comedic timing. Not that they carry one big plot throughout each of them, although I'm sure someone could cook up some elaborate plot in which all three movies are connected in the same universe.
Hashtag Wright Cinematic Universe.
I don't really want to lose that much time of my life to look up those theories, although it does sound fun. I just know that's a rabbit hole I'll get sucked down. But I'm sure it's one corner of the internet where people are coming up with ways to connect Shaun of the Dead, Hot Fuzz, and The World's End. And I'm sure it's completely doable.
Oh, yeah. Well, on that note, let's dive into Shaun of the Dead and talk about that film.
Yeah, let's do that. And just to give you a brief overview of what it's specifically about, it covers the story of kind of a young to middle-aged guy kind of treading water in his life, and his best friend, played by Nick Frost, the main guy is played by Simon Pegg, is holding him down, and he's having trouble with his job, his family, and his romantic relationship, his girlfriend. And then everything kind of falls apart, set to the backdrop of a zombie apocalypse. And the question is, will Shaun, obviously our main character, rise to the occasion? Will he be able to grow up, in a sense, which is definitely a theme we're going to see in all 3 of these films. Will he grow up, rise to the occasion? And as he writes on a whiteboard near the 30-minute mark of the film, get his life together.
Yeah.
I'm paraphrasing. I probably got that wrong. But it's something close to that.
Pretty much it. And I think the first scene in this film is a perfect kind of... It sets up the type of movie that we're watching as far as kind comedy. So we start on a shot of Simon Pegg, Shaun, in the film, drinking a beer, and then we find out he's talking to his girlfriend. They're like about to break up, and she's talking about how his best friend is, so immature and holding him back, and he needs to not be hanging out with him so much. And then she goes, "No offense," and the camera pans over, and we see Nick Frost's character just right there. And then they're all talking, and then he's like, "Well, what about your friends?" And he says, "No offense," and we pan over, and their friends are right there. So we're kind of like this idea that basically if it's not in the frame, it doesn't exist until the audience has seen it. So it's just kind of this thing where Edgar Wright is going to, we know that Edgar Wright is going to be playing us from now on, in terms of using the screen to show us only exactly what he wants us to see, and then throwing things in unexpected ways for comedic effect.
Right. And that's one of the big jobs of the director. And he does it so well. And I feel like most of this podcast is probably just going to be me saying Edgar Wright does this so well, but he does. He controls what you're going to see within the frame, and uses those reveals for comedic timing, which is brilliant. And it also feels distinctly British. I'm not sure if that's because I've seen it in 3 British films in a row, or because American films tend to be kind of more filmed improv than they are cinematic humor. But it feels like that. It feels like awkward situational comedy played through this control of the frame.
Yeah, and there's a video essay that we have that we'll post a link to on the blog, that talks about how Edgar Wright, where other directors would use dialogue to kind of get a joke across by literally telling us what the joke is, Edgar Wright has a way of showing us with blocking and framing and editing and all of these techniques that film has, that he can use, and using that to tell the joke, which is more impactful because we're kind of experiencing it rather than being told it.
Yeah, and one of the things that we definitely have to talk about in Shaun of the Dead, especially because that's where it started, but it carries on through the other ones, other 2 films in different ways, is the mix of comedy and some other big genre theme. So in Shaun of the Dead, it's comedy and zombie horror, which mix together. And it's definitely something that's been done before, but it's done really, really well by Edgar Wright.
Yeah, one of the really interesting things about Shaun of the Dead and the way that, like we were talking about, we're mixing, a British almost rom-com kind of feel with horror, which are kind of the 2 most opposite genres you can think of almost. But it's done in a way where each, like the inclusion of each genre kind of heightens the other one. So at any point where there is like a lot of mortal danger from the zombies in this movie, someone does something ridiculous to bring kind of the personal tensions to the head, and just the backdrop of, apocalyptic life or death situation. And, oh my gosh, why are you taking a phone call right now from your friend? You need to grow up and be more mature. Makes both situations more hilarious. And Edgar Wright is really good at knowing, at what point in the, up and down emotionally of the horror and the comedy to intersplice the other one just to accent each in their own way.
Yeah, and the way the horror is brought around is pretty brilliant. Like for instance, at the start where Shaun finally realizes something is going on, or I think right before it, he's pretty dense, I'll be honest. But
yeah.
For instance, here you can hear an example of how this exposition is done on the TV, which if you just shot straight, it would be really boring. But the way Edgar Wright does it lends comedy and interest to something that would just be kind of slow horror exposition otherwise.
Although no one official is prepared to comment, religious groups are calling it Judgment Day. There's panic on the streets of London as an increasing number of reports of serious attacks on people who are literally being eaten alive.
And that's a great example of a moment that is literally a mix of horror and comedy. It's being delivered in a really funny way, but technically it's horror, and the emotions that Shaun is experiencing, and you can see it on the screen if you watch the movie, and you should watch the movie, is kind of like fear and worry at it. But you can't help but
Shaun's
laughing.
Not scared at this point because he's so, like you said, dense.
Yeah, he's still pretty dense. I would like to project some feelings of fear on his face in this scene. It's pretty blank, though.
Yeah, and the varying degrees of denseness in both Simon Pegg and Nick Frost's characters through these three films are something we should talk about also.
Yeah, because they change. But those the characters themselves kind of help blend the two as well, because they might be scared. And when I say the two, I mean comedy and horror again, because they might be scared going through this, but they can't help acting like idiots over the course of the movie. And I don't mean like idiots like cracking jokes. I mean doing dumb things that put them in danger, and in really funny ways too. Like when Nick Frost's character takes a phone call while they're surrounded by zombies and trying not to
attract attention
to themselves, and he just takes a phone call. And on one hand, this should be terrifying because, oh my gosh, now the zombies know they're there. But on the other hand, like, what the hell, Ed? Like, it's funny.
Yeah.
Once you you understand that this character has been holding his friend Shaun back a little bit throughout his life, and this is a big moment where that boils to a head. So then you get another added level in the scene of drama blending together, and it's just really exciting to watch one scene being able to tackle all those things at once. And honestly, any scene should be able to tackle multiple moods at once. Or maybe I'm going off the rails here. I don't know.
No, I think you have a point that any time that you can incorporate, two different moods and kind of create a more layered experience for the audience, because we're keeping track of, the terror of the literal situation and the humor in the contrast of the way that the characters are experiencing it. So Ed, as a character, just talking about the differences in denseness, basically Ed is totally oblivious and completely immature, and we never really get the sense that he grasps what's going on. Like, he's so self-centered that even if they're, trying to get away, he's thinking about, what's the more sexy car to be driving at that specific moment. Whereas Simon Pegg's character, Shaun, we get the sense he has a little bit more of an arc. At the beginning, he's just as, kind of immature and stuff, but he has a job and he has a relationship and he's trying to keep it all together, and we see him start to be feeling the weight of his responsibilities and the fact that he has to start stepping up to the plate. And throughout the film, we're watching him as he grows and as he begins to realize that he is the leader and he has to do these certain things, and he still messes them up, which is funny, but we get the sense that he's at least trying. Nick Frost's character has a little bit of an arc at the end, but he's mostly there to be the antagonist to Simon Pegg's growth as a character.
Right.
Not intentionally, but that's just kind of the function that he serves for the film.
Yeah, he's kind of like this weight hanging around Shaun's neck as he tries to progress through, both trying to survive and get his life together in a bigger sense of the phrase, other than just, keeping his life from the zombies. And that's not to say, none of this is to say either that there aren't really impactful moments in the movie where Edgar Wright tones down the comedy because, something really big is going on. For instance, there's a couple of big deaths that we won't specify, throughout the course of the film. Obviously, because it's a zombie movie, and the stakes have to stay high because it's a zombie flick as well. But whenever one of those deaths rolls around, we might come into it with some comedy and leave quickly with some comedy. But Edgar Wright isn't afraid to linger in the moment and let that weight and the weight that our protagonist Shaun feels in that moment kind of linger on us and in the audience as well. And just like a little reminder as we're going through like what is really a really funny movie about trying to survive a zombie apocalypse, as we're going through this zombie romp, that, you know, there are still stakes here. There are still big personal developments, big personal losses happening over the course of this movie.
Yeah, and that's one of the things that I really like about these movies is the fact that the drama is still infused in there. So we have those moments where everyone is feeling the weight of the situation, and Shaun is, you know, learning to deal with different things, like how to keep his relationship together, his relationship with his stepdad, his relationship with his mom, and all of these things. And we take those moments to resolve those issues and talk through those issues. And it's not just, you know, a story about two man babies who go through this crazy experience and don't learn anything at the end. Like, we actually learn stuff through it, and we learn how the characters grow. And we're going to see that in all three of these films, I think, in different ways.
Yeah.
So
It's one of the reasons these movies resonate with us and stick with us over the course of the years. So let's go into our next movie now, Hot Fuzz, which is a different movie in a satisfying way, but also satisfyingly similar to Shaun of the Dead. And do you want to set that one up for us, Jonathan?
Yarp. So I had to.
We had to.
So Hot Fuzz, I'll just, like, in the broadest sense, because this one and The World's End both have spoilers, so we're going to try and talk about at least the first half of both of them. But in general, Hot Fuzz is, again, a British comedy, or if you will, Brit flick, kind of put together with another genre, which this time happens to be a buddy cop movie and kind of a mystery crime thriller. So what happens is we start off learning about this police inspector from London named Nicholas Angel. He's kind of top of his class. He is the best on the force, and basically his higher-ups decide that he is too good for the force and he's making everyone else look bad. So they send him off to the country, to this little town where he can't, it doesn't matter how good he is because there's nothing really to do. It's just a little town. But he ends up getting partnered with Nick Frost's character, who's named Danny Butterman. And Danny is he's a cop because his dad is chief of the police force, but he doesn't really do anything. All he does is, watch buddy cop movies, like Bad Boys 2 and Point Break and all these action movies. And that's kind of where he gets his idea of policemanning and what being cool is all about. So he really is clueless. And Simon Pegg in this one is the straight man. He's very regimented, very strict on himself, married to the force, as they talk about in the movie. And so it's kind of a mix of Nick Frost's character learning how to, play by the book, and Simon Pegg's character learning how to relax a little bit through this investigation that they have to go through together.
Yeah, it's interesting because the two leads, their characters change a lot. But those themes, like we were talking about before, kind of, they hold true. Just because Sergeant Angel is a very regimented, put together guy, and he knows how to be a really good police officer, doesn't mean that he has his life together. He ends up getting kicked off his force by his coworkers. His girlfriend dumps him, or actually he dumps her because he decides he doesn't have time for a girlfriend. Right, that's it. So he
all he
doesn't.
has time to do is water a peace lily plant that he carries with him everywhere.
Yeah,
because they're so low maintenance.
Yeah, he doesn't have anything going on in his life besides his job. And when he moves to the country, his job even seems to fall apart. So he's definitely another character who has to get it together. He's starting from a different place than Shaun did, but the place he's trying to get to is very similar. And much in the same way, but not quite. Danny is less of a weight around Nick Angel's neck, and more in a weird way, kind of a guide to loosening up and seeing that other things in his life
But also a protege
matter.
at the same time.
Yeah. He teaches him, he shows him the ropes, and kind of starts to groom Danny into being a better cop. It's in the first one, in Shaun of the Dead, they definitely have a best friends from college relationship, and in this one, it feels almost like a big brother little brother kind of relationship. Like definitely still best friends, but one who's definitely kind of guiding and setting an example for another one. So you have
and
the
still
same
learning
kind of,
something from the process, even though he's the guide.
Yeah, you still kind of have those pseudo-similar arcs going through, and Danny definitely has an arc in this one, whereas in the other one, he maybe doesn't. He
does a little bit at the end, but
but not much.
Not much to speak of.
Yeah. But it definitely does that. And it does the same thing with mixing comedy and another genre.
Yeah, because like we were talking about before, Edgar Wright knows his movies, so he knows, all of the action movie and mystery movie tropes that have been used in films for as long as those kind of films have been around. And basically he funnels all of that into Danny, who has seen all these movies, and at some point we see his movie room, and it's just like, racks and racks of films. And so Danny is kind of, the one who's like, have you ever fired two guns while jumping through the air? And kind of like all these romantic ideas of what a cool city police officer does. And the whole time, Nick is just saying, no, that's not how real police work works. What we really do is sit here and we pull people over for traffic tickets most of the time, and stuff like that. So he's kind of, setting us up for a more realistic kind of look at the police force, and we get this. We even get these montages of just paperwork. It's like the most exciting paperwork that you'll ever watch in a movie.
Yeah. But they're Edgar Wright style montages, and that makes a difference.
Yeah. But basically, as Danny is kind of bringing up all of these action movie tropes, and Nick is saying, no, that's not really how this works, Edgar Wright is bringing those tropes into our mind. And later on in the film, which we don't want to talk about too much right now, but he pays off every one of those things that Danny has brought up, and Edgar Wright definitely makes it the entertaining ride that we were all hoping for.
Yeah, and we definitely get a lot of action, especially I think like the last 30 minutes of this movie is just straight action, and it's amazing. It definitely super satisfying, fulfills on everything that's promised throughout the movie. But again, with that really intense action, we have that comedy blend throughout, where everything is really funny. Not like the characters are cracking jokes, but through the camera work, the way that the reveals are done, like we were talking in Shaun of the Dead, is super similar. You have like stuff appearing from out of frame, like a phone sticking out next to a character's face, or I think in this one it's a slice of cake.
Yeah, there's cake.
Although I'm sure there was a phone in there somewhere, because it's not an Edgar Wright movie unless somebody sticks a phone into the frame, which is good. I like that signature. And I definitely think that comedy and action are a little it's a more explored blend, so I think this was a little easier to pull off. But that's not to diminish the skill that it took to bring them together so seamlessly, so that it feels like one world and one mood throughout, like one layered mood, instead of like one scene you feel like you're watching a comedy movie, one scene you feel like you're watching an action movie. Like it's definitely the same consistency throughout. You just have the blend of comedy and action.
Yeah, and like we were saying, Edgar Wright knows his movies, so he knows how, comedy works, and he knows how the mystery suspense movie works, and he knows to put them together. And he also kind of blends his movies in a pretty self-aware way, like, the fact that Danny is always watching movies, and there's actually a scene where Danny shows Nick two of his favorite movies, like we were saying, Bad Boys 2 and Point Break, which literal clips of them are in the movie. And those are actually, payoffs or setups to things that are paid off later on, like we were talking about. And in all of these movies, Edgar Wright is really good at taking everything that was kind of set up in the first third or half of the movie and paying them off again in the last third or quarter of the movie. So basically, by the time the movie is over, you've connected so many dots in your brain that the entire film feels like a tapestry that was intentionally created, and every thread was put in there on purpose, so that when you go back and watch it again, and we've talked about movies that have a high rewatch value, and these definitely fall into that category, as you're watching the first part of that movie, you're like, okay, I know where this is going. Even just like one line, like certain lines will just kind of, feel like a one-off thing or like a silly thing that someone who doesn't know what they're talking about is saying. And then later on it comes back. And this happens in The World's End as well, which we'll talk about. And we're going to wait till overall notes to kind of, give specifics on these, because, clearly the payoffs are going to be spoilers. So we'll talk about all that in overall notes once the people who we assume have seen the movies are still listening.
Yeah, for sure. For sure. So let's go on and let's talk about The World's End from 2013 and the last film in the Cornetto Trilogy. And just a brief setup about what that is about. So The World's End covers the story of five friends, the main two, being played by Simon Pegg and Nick Frost, of course. Simon Pegg plays Gary King, and Nick Frost plays Andy. And a bit of a role reversal on this one. Nick Frost's character is the guy who seems to have his life together and has a big fancy job and stuff. And Simon Pegg's character, Gary King, is more of a screw up. Like, he's definitely at a low point starting in the film.
Living in the past.
Yeah. In fact, the first scene of the film is a flashback by 43-year-old Gary of the first of their first attempt at the Golden Mile when they're in high school, when they graduate high school. These five friends. And the story of the movie is the story of Gary King trying to get his five friends back together. They're now all in their 40s, early middle age, try and get them back together to finish this Golden Mile. And the Golden Mile is the series of 12 pubs in their hometown. And it's a pub crawl, essentially. You try to drink one pint at every pub. And that's 12 pints is a lot, obviously.
Yeah.
So
and now they're not, as youthful, and Nick Frost's character doesn't even drink anymore. So it's kind of this ridiculous and self-centered thing for Gary to do. But all of his friends kind of go along with it just because, old time's sake, and the fact that Gary is very convincing, sometimes connivingly so, to get them all in on this. Yeah,
and there's of course, like in the other two films, there's a big genre twist in this one, and this one it has a sci-fi twist. I don't know if we want to explain too much about that in the pre-spoiler section.
Yeah, not yet.
Because it's a pretty satisfying reveal if you haven't seen it. And if you haven't seen it, what are you doing? Go watch this movie. And then come back to this so that we can just say what it is.
Yeah, so this film has, a lot of the things we've been talking about, but one of the bigger elements, technically, in the way that this film is presented is foreshadowing. So, like you said, the first several minutes of the film are a flashback to this first pub crawl. They go to these 12 pubs that all have very interesting names. Basically, the things that happened in that first time and that in that flashback happen again in a different way with a more, exaggerated, with the twist thrown in and with all of these things. But like you can see the genesis of, the actions that happen at each pub from the flashback, and even just the names of the pubs kind of are a little bit of foreshadowing. And this one was really fun to watch after you've seen it and watch through for all of the things that are coming up that are set up at the beginning that seem super innocuous until the second half of the movie when they get paid off again.
Right. Even trying to, for instance, trying to spot the marmalade sandwich in the opening 5 minutes of the film the second time through, and you'll know what that is once you watch it. I don't feel like I'm giving anything away. Or
right.
Trying to figure out what each of the pub names mean, because they're essentially echoing the actions that happen in each of the pubs, whether it be the World's End, the titular last pub, or the First Post, which I feel like that's a giveaway. That's the first bar in the Golden Mile.
It's the first one they go to.
But each of them, it gets a little more complicated from there, and it's interesting to watch. And some of the matches are really funny, and some of them are really dramatic. And some of them I needed to look up because I didn't quite get them. But
right.
I guess I'm just not as smart as Edgar Wright. I'm okay with that.
There's a special feature on the Blu-ray, if anyone has that literally walks through each of the pubs and tells you what the name means and shows you a couple other signs that are kind of foreshadowing and stuff like that. So if you have the Blu-ray, check that out.
Yeah, and I think one of the biggest things I learned this week, because we're always trying to learn things here in the Filmlings, is that if you're watching an Edgar Wright film and you see something and you go, I wonder if that's on purpose. The answer is yes.
Yes, it is.
It is on purpose.
Always. More accurately, the answer is yarp.
We'll humor you. But yeah, for sure. He just plans so much of it. He plans so much of these movies out to the point where there's no, or at least I can't notice any loose ends. Or I have to go online to that one section of the internet where people nitpick everything, which I guess by that I mean the entire internet.
Right.
For people to start putting out plot holes, and I'm like, really? You noticed that? You cared? Because watching an Edgar Wright movie to me always feels like one of those really complicated domino setups, where it goes through loop-de-loops and towers and stuff, and then it knocks over this big field of what looked like dominoes to reveal this big picture of the Queen of England made out of dominoes, and at the end
Keep
it just
calm
all
and domino
makes sense. On. There you go. It spells out cheesy pop culture posters, but yeah, that's definitely the feeling you get. And he's been fairly straightforward about putting that effort into his movies to make sure everything's connected, and doing the foreshadowing on these films. And he doesn't just do that alone. He works with Simon Pegg, because Simon Pegg helps write these films, and obviously, is a big part of these movies. He's always the lead.
Right, which is great as far as a working relationship goes, and which is great as far as, especially having your lead actor involved in those decisions, because then, your actor isn't trying to guess, what's my motivation in this scene, or what do I need to, how do I present this or something, because he is super ingrained in all the decisions that are happening. And I'm sure Nick Frost is pretty close in all that too, since all three of them are involved in all of these films also. And there's other actors that Edgar Wright uses a lot. He's one of those directors that has, kind of a pet cast. So, Martin Freeman shows up in all these films, Bill Nighy is in several of them, and several other actors. And, we've talked about before how building that group of people that you can work with and work with well kind of helps each person grow and the whole production grow each time you work with them.
Yeah. And plus, let's not forget that they're British and there's like 15 comedy actors in the entirety of Britain. So, obviously they're all going to end up working on the same movies. You got to
utilize them.
Those working relationships just make it easier.
Yeah. And I also want to talk about, the dramatic elements in the World's End, because this film actually goes to some pretty deep places. The whole premise being that Gary King is an alcoholic who is totally living in his high school world. Like, he has not grown out of senior year of high school Gary King. And that's the whole point of the movie, is that this is just one big kind of narcissistic adventure for him to go on to relive his high school days, because that we get the idea that that's where he peaked and nothing better than that has ever happened. He actually says that at the beginning of the film. After we finished this pub crawl, we felt like the world could never get better than this, and it never did. So that's kind of everyone else. All his other friends have moved on and gotten jobs and lives and all this stuff except for him. And now he's dragging them back. So he, in this film, is the weight on everyone else, kind of in the way that Nick Frost's character was in Shaun of the Dead. And like we were saying, even though we've got, ridiculous, sci-fi tropes going on and comedy and all this stuff, we still take those moments to say, okay, we're dealing with some real issues here, and there is progress that needs to be made, and we see the characters go through that. And all of these other things kind of culminate at the end when there's kind of this philosophical showdown between a certain entity and the some of the friends who make it to the World's End. Spoiler alert, they do make it to the World's End. But yeah, there's kind of this, back and forth about, the and like we were saying with all of these, there's kind of the overarching theme of the characters who are going through these situations is trying to find this balance between, having a youthful spirit, but also being able to man up and take responsibility for the things you have to take responsibility for, because, we all have to grow up. Our responsibilities get more and more. And we have to take on those responsibilities and do them maturely while still not losing kind of this joy for life that we had when we were younger. So all of these characters are going through the same journey, trying to get to the same place, finding that balance, but they're coming from different places. And I think that that's a really cool way to like give a wider range of your audience who are coming from those different spheres of mindset and stuff like that, and everyone can find some way to identify with the characters in these movies and realize that we're all on that journey in one way or another.
Yeah, and in a way, it's kind of different. It's kind of three examples of finding a way to do that from three very different characters. So not just taking responsibility.
Well, six, actually.
Six, yeah, you're right. Although not all six take responsibility.
That's true. But you can see, you can even see in Shaun of the Dead how Ed, should be taking this journey, even if he isn't. He's, the example of what not to do, and you can still learn from that.
Yeah. But, it also... something that I got from the films is that it's not just about growing up, but finding kind of your own way to grow up and learn how to take care of these responsibilities, because each of the films also has this running theme of kind of rejecting conformity or that blasé hive mind of, that you sometimes see in adulthood where everybody does the same thing. And we'll dive into the specifics of that in each film in the overall section, because to really dive into that, you have to dive into some of the spoilers, which you can't quite do. But it definitely is a complex theme, and the fact that they get to return to it over 3 films with 3 different sets of characters, I think makes it a really interesting exploration of that theme, because it's very rare that you get that from like the same. I would say this is actually pretty much unique. Same director, same set of same set of actors, probably the same set of crew, making 3 unconnected movies, plot-wise, all dealing with the same themes, which is super interesting. Because if let's say they were connected, let's say it was about a guy who. You know what? I'm not going to go to the specifics of that, but let's say they were all somehow connected in 3 ways. If the same character had to take the same journey 3 movies in a row in the same trilogy, we would be bored senseless. And also really confused. We'd be like, why did you just regress? You just figured this out in movie 1. Why are you regressing in movie 2? But instead, we get to go back over this same theme from, 3 or 6, depending on how you look at it, different viewpoints over the course of these movies, with the same, supportive creative cast and crew behind it.
Yeah, and the visual casing of each one is different. So, not only is it a fun or a useful kind of character study, but each one is just fun, especially for people who enjoy specific genres of film. It's fun to see how Edgar Wright, kind of wraps each one in a different genre, with the zombies or the mystery or the sci-fi, and seeing, all those little things just for people who enjoy movies and entertainment. And he does each one of them so well, while, putting meaning into it. It's not just a zombie comedy that just exists to parody zombie movies. It has its own filmic themes and stuff like that. And that's what we talk about a lot on this podcast, is that as long as you can put something in your movie that has a thematic viewpoint and something to say, that's what makes a good movie, rather than just, oh, I love zombie movies, let's make a zombie movie that's about zombies, Right.
That's kind of boring. But you could almost say that with this, between the similarities and differences of these films, that they're all the same brand of ice cream, just in different flavors with different wrappers.
If you say so, Alex. Well, with that, let's get into our overall notes and spoilers. So, as we've been saying, if you have not seen these films, you can pause the podcast now and go watch them, and then come back to this point, because Alex is about to spoil everything in about 10 seconds. In 5, 4, 3, 2, go for it.
Ed becomes a zombie, but Shaun keeps him as a pet, and then the NWA is like this murderous cult, but then the Swan wins. And then it's aliens, but robots, but also robots who are not robots.
Well, Alex, do you know what robot actually means?
Is it Slavic?
Yeah, it means slave, and they're not really slaves.
Well, if you say so, but they kind of seem like robots.
Yeah, they're definitely robots.
Definitely robots. And they kind of are slaves too. Like that's the funniest part. That's
the whole point. They keep denying it, but that's all they are.
They're slaves to this hive mind, man. Don't Starbucks us, man.
Can't Starbucks the whole human race.
Which is funny because I kind of like Starbucks, but
Yeah.
whatever.
So if you've seen the movies,
now.
you know what we're talking about. And that's one of the things that we do want to talk about, is the fact that this this zombie slash hive mind theme runs through all three of these films. So they're like, I kind of see them as three different kinds of zombie movies. Because in Hot Fuzz, we have the NWA, which is the Neighborhood Watch Alliance, our kind of organization which looks over the town and, kind of is supposed to clean it up and keep people out of trouble and stuff like that, but really just ends up killing anybody that they slightly don't like, and just murdering them to get them out of the way, which is this literal cult where people are chanting and, they all say the same thing, for the greater good. For
the greater good.
At some point, they can't even, think for themselves. All they're thinking of is what do we do to keep our town the town of the year
village of England.
Yeah. And then in The World's End, they go back to their hometown, Newton Haven, and basically the entire town they've taken all the citizens and replaced them with robot versions of themselves, which are young and never age and anything like this. And the aliens who have come down and invaded are basically trying to assimilate everyone to be, the same person, the same mindset, the same ideas and everything. So it turns into this other kind of zombie where nobody can think for themselves because everyone's mind is literally connected. That's another point in the film, is that they're basically the internet and everyone has the same thoughts and the same ideas and everything. And Simon Pegg and Nick Frost characters have to kind of rebel against that, and eventually the aliens decide that it's a hopeless cause.
Yeah, and even if you go back to Shaun of the Dead before the plague actually hits, or a virus, or I'm not sure what to call it, because they never really explain it in Shaun of the Dead. In fact, that's kind of a running gag towards the end. Is that whenever people try to explain it, they keep getting cut off by convenient circumstances. But before
I think there was some kind of like one-off thing about an asteroid or something falling to Earth and causing people to get sick or something. But it's not. Yeah. That's not important in the film at all.
Not at all. But the point I was getting to before I distracted myself. What was that before people even start turning into zombies, they're kind of already portrayed as zombies, which is a funny way of foreshadowing, but it's also kind of a commentary on how you live your day-to-day life, and also the repetitive fashion that Shaun's been living his life, just doing the same thing every day. So you see people waiting in line at the bus stop, and they look like zombies. You see people on the bus staring at magazines or listening to music, and they look like zombies. Not in that they have zombie makeup on, but they have that blank gaze, mouth kind of hanging open.
Going through the motions of life.
Yeah, the way that I actually see people on the subway every day is how they look in the film.
And this kind of crops up again in The World's End, where we kind of, as we're being introduced to the five friends, as Gary King is going to recruit them for this second round of the pub crawl, we kind of get this idea that some of them are almost in this robotic phase. So Martin Freeman's character has his little Bluetooth headset in, and he's all constantly connected to his clients and talking to them, and just kind of in this corporate world. And one of the other friends has kind of taken a job from his father, so he's kind of, just following in footsteps instead of doing his own thing. So we get hints of that, and then they have to be the individuals after they find out that the whole town has become the same person, essentially.
Yeah, so we can't talk about Edgar Wright without talking about visual comedy. Like we talked about earlier, there's a lot of the humor in Edgar Wright films don't come from people saying jokes. They kind of come from the way information is revealed. A quick pan over to a character, or a quick cut over to a character. And so there's a lot of these to talk about. So we're going to try to get through as many of them as we can, and kind of show the unique ways that you can do humor, utilizing the full range of film, which is, audio and visual. So not just spoken jokes, but visual jokes too. And I think the one I wanted to talk about first is fence gags, because, we have to talk about fence gags.
Yeah, so in each of these movies, there's a point where the characters have to jump over some kind of low fence, like a garden fence, at some point. And in Shaun of the Dead, Shaun hops the fence, but that section that he grabs onto just like falls straight down. So, it's unexpected. We're thinking he's just going to jump over it, but it's just like, so it's kind of one of those unexpected shock kind of jokes. And then it becomes a running thing, where in Hot Fuzz, Simon Pegg's character, who's the, actual cop, he's really good at what he does, ends up hopping like 5 fences in a row. And then Nick Frost's character goes to hop the fences, and he just like bowls right through them. He just like falls through one, through several panels or whatever. And then in The World's End, again, Simon Pegg's character goes to hop a fence, and just the entire fence falls over. So it's this kind of running thing where when it comes up, you can see it coming, but you don't know how Edgar Wright is going to spin it for that particular movie.
Yeah, it gets funnier with repetition, for sure, and once you're in the know. So by the time you see it in The World's End, it's really, really funny. But it's also, that's not to say that's not funny in Shaun of the Dead. It definitely is. And it also shows that, a good Buster Keaton-esque practical gag is never out of fashion. Don't underestimate the value of those. They're definitely worth it. They also have me wondering what happened in either Edgar Wright or Simon Pegg's life that this is like a go-to gag. Like, did it just come up in conversation one day, or is there like some really interesting story from
backstory,
like their college days when they were like really smashed one night, and they're like, "I bet you can't jump over that fence, man," and then someone tried and they failed. Yeah.
Another thing that happens in all of these films that Edgar Wright has come to be known for is his montage editing. So really mundane things, Edgar Wright is able to cut really quick shots of, each stage of it. So, the entirety of moving from London to the country can take about 30 seconds and still be done in a funny way, rather than, throwing some pop music and having some helicopter stock footage of whatever city he's moving to kind of tell us what's happening.
Yeah, it's a way to keep those things interesting, and it's another opportunity to put some humor back in. Like you were talking about with Hot Fuzz, like probably the funniest way you could possibly do a paperwork scene or make it interesting is to do it in those quick cut montage styles.
Yeah, make it look really intense when it's really an extremely mundane kind of thing.
And it can take on some added meaning, like in The World's End, he does it repeatedly whenever anybody's pouring a beer at a bar, filling it up from the draft. Is those quick cuts with the sound effects of a beer being poured is actually quite beautiful, and it takes on meaning as they go on from bar to bar, and Gary King becomes a little more desperate to finish. And they visit some bars that don't even have bartenders in them.
Yeah, and a lot of the humor from those montages comes from the fact that Nick Frost's character doesn't drink. And the way they do the sound editing, like you were saying, that they made this really like deep rumbly sound for every time they pour the beer. So it's and then when it gets to the water, it goes so it's just this kind of emphasizing the fact that Gary King definitely sees Nick Frost as kind of a wimp for only being able to drink water.
Yeah.
Which actually, I didn't get until this time I watched it, the fact that Nick Frost has some weird monologue about what takes courage? Walking into a bar full of, rugby players and all these really tough guys and ordering a water. That is tough. And at the end of the movie, Gary King walks in with his robot buddies and orders 5 waters in this bar full of really tough-looking vigilante kind of guys.
Yeah.
Even that gets paid off. All these, like we were saying, all these little one-liner things come back around. Like nothing is put in there accidentally or just for the sake of filling space. Everything has a purpose.
Yeah, exactly. And something we kind of mentioned earlier, but we do want to expound upon is having things enter or exit frame in a really interesting way. Edgar Wright is really conscious of the rule that applies when you're doing anything with a camera, is that the world outside of the frame doesn't exist. So anything outside of the frame is complete blank to the audience. It's information they don't have. So if you have something enter the frame unexpectedly, or something that is directly opposing whatever the character is saying, then it can be really funny. So there's this part in Shaun of the Dead where Shaun is at the store and one of his employees...
The store that he works at, yeah.
Yeah, the store that he works at. He doesn't own it. Because that would mean he has his life together. But anyway, one of his employees is challenging him, and Shaun is trying to explain that he doesn't let his social life and his work life interfere with each other. And that is promptly interrupted. This is a close-up on Shaun, by the way, by a character off-screen saying, Liz for you, which is his girlfriend, and then putting the phone in frame next to his ear right at that point in time. So the thing entering the frame unexpectedly in and of itself would be pretty funny. But the fact that it directly just juxtaposes this thing that Shaun is trying to make a point of is even funnier. You have this information in frame of Shaun denying that he lets his social life and work life mix, and then enter frame left, a phone completely denying that, which ends up being pretty funny. And then it becomes a gag over the course of all 3 of these movies, and Scott Pilgrim, if you go watch that, another Edgar Wright film, where a character is speaking and then suddenly a phone enters the screen,
or cake, or whatever,
yeah.
Another gag that's used repeatedly, or a technique that Edgar Wright likes to use, is music. Whether it's kind of an ironic use, like Ed blasting hard metal music while everyone's trying to focus on surviving the zombie apocalypse, or at the end of that movie when they're playing a Queen song and beating a zombie with pool cues to the beat of the music. And there's other points where, in Hot Fuzz, he's going to work at a fair and he wants to be, on the big murder case, but they keep putting him on inane jobs like, swan hunting and
swan capturing, no hunting.
Okay, yeah. Swan retrieving and working security at the town fair, and there's a song that's something like "Out in the country," blah 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 blah, and so his use of music is very intentional, and just from following Edgar Wright on Twitter and the fact that he has a lot of music video history, I kind of get the sense that Edgar Wright knows just about as much about music as he does about movies. So that's all of his music choices are just as intentional as any of his other comedy choices or writing choices or anything like that. And that kind of pulls us into his new movie, which was just announced a couple weeks ago.
Yeah, so coming out June 28th is Edgar Wright's newest film, Baby Driver, free plug of the week. So it's all about music and driving, and it is also a movie set in America, like Scott Pilgrim. So we're going to see a bit of a different cast in this one. But hopefully all those classic Edgar Wright touches that make his film so great. And if the trailers are anything to judge by, I think we will see those. Yeah,
so I think that, it's not part of this trilogy. It's a completely separate thing. So some of the things that kind of the way the editing was done and things that defined this trilogy as its own visual and thematic trilogy might be absent, but just the fact that Edgar Wright's ideas are always so unique and so intentional that we should be able to still see traces of, his exceptional eye for editing and framing. And even though it doesn't seem like it's not a strictly comedic film, it's definitely more inspired by classic 90s heist films like Reservoir Dogs and Heat and stuff like that. I'm sure that there will be, unexpected things that have comedic tint to them, even if it's mostly an action film. And like we were saying, the fact that Edgar Wright is so familiar with pretty much every kind of genre and the action genre, it'll be really interesting to see someone who's steeped in that knowledge be able to pull off his own kind of story.
Yeah, and I think if we land on anything this week, it should be this idea that Edgar Wright's films feel so unique and so fun and so interesting to watch repeatedly. And the reason that I think they feel so unique is that he has all of this film knowledge. He has a list of his 1,000 favorite movies, and I'm sure he's watched many thousands of other movies. So we're looking at these movies, and we can rattle off all of these references to these films, to other films that he's watched and other works of art that he's consumed and studied. And
we're seeing references that we're not even getting to.
Exactly.
Another thing we talk about the podcast is this, recycling of art. Like, you're taking in references that you don't even realize as references, and then if you reference that, it's kind of this big chain of, the best kind of telephone where art just becomes more unique the more it references other art in a weird way.
Yeah. I really wish I could remember where I heard this, but it was a pretty genius sentiment that if you ever think you've come up with something completely unique, you probably just don't know what references you're making. And, I think that's one of the keys to Edgar Wright's work, is that he's so versed in cinema and cinema history and the art and the craft of how to make a movie and how everybody has made movies. He's seen what's worked and what hasn't worked. He knows what he likes and what he doesn't like, and he can take all of those things from all those places and make his own style, his own brand, which he clearly has done. And that's one of our goals through this podcast, is to learn as much as we can about as many different kinds of cinema as we can from as many different creators as we can, who we like and we think their work is good, and we want to learn from and put that into our own work moving forward.
Absolutely. So I'm excited to see Baby Driver and see how some of the things we've talked about on this episode might play into that, and how Edgar Wright has grown and what kind of differences he brings to it outside of, like we were saying, this visual and thematic trilogy.
Yeah, and I'm going to be watching to see if anybody eats ice cream in this movie.
Yeah, we'll have to see.
Okay. But anyway, let's talk about next week.
Next week, we are talking about what you guys want to watch. We ran another poll on our Twitter account, and this time we asked you guys to tell us what trilogy we should watch. And you guys voted for Toy Story. So we will be watching the three extant Toy Story films. Toy Story 1 from 1995, Toy Story 2 from 1999, and Toy Story 3 from 2010. And there is another one coming, but as long as it's still just a trilogy, we will treat it as such.
Yeah, we got to hurry up and make that podcast.
Yep. But I'm excited. These are, movies that we've grown up with, and also the first ever computer animated feature film. So there's lots of film history that goes along with these movies and sentimental value. So it should be a good episode.
For sure. So be sure to come back next week and check it out. But that's about all the time we have for this episode.
If you have movie suggestions for us or just want to reach out, I can be found on Twitter at JSSatchel.
And I'm at Alex Geringer.
And to find links to stuff that we talked about today, you can view them on the blog at thefilmlings.wordpress.com.
If you like the show, let us know. Leave us a review on iTunes so other people will know what we're all about.
We definitely appreciate it.
Talk to you next week.
All right, see ya.